Podcasts are notoriously easy to start, but really difficult to grow. And you might find that if you've started a podcast, you have tried promoting it on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube Shorts, but nothing is quite working in terms of getting you the traction that you want to see. So let's talk about it. How do you actually grow a podcast in the most efficient and effective way possible? And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Hiwote. I'm a podcast producer and the creator of the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator, where I help people launch and grow really unique shows that only they could make. And if you're someone who wants to establish themselves as a thought leader in your space, or you want to make a podcast because you want it to support the business and the vision for your life that you have, then you might be a good fit for the Accelerator. You can book a free discovery call with me using the link in the show notes. And if you're wondering why you should trust me, these are some of the shows that I have produced. Some fan favorites are Where Should We Begin with Esther Perel, and This Is Dating, which was listed as one of Time Magazine's best podcasts of 2022. We love to see it. So let's talk about it. What does it really take to grow your podcast? So first things first, most podcasters think about social media as being the same thing as marketing. And actually, I want to help you reframe that a bit. Marketing is understanding your listener so well and then reaching your listener wherever they're at. So deprioritize platforms or social media spaces and actually refocus on who your listener is and what they're struggling with. So the platform kind of matters a lot less than whether you're making content that actually resonates with your listener. And not just resonates, actually. We want you to make super shareable content. So ask yourself, what is my ideal listener Googling in the middle of the night? What would be a no-brainer for them to share with a friend? If you can answer these two questions and make podcast episodes that address that, it is inevitable that your podcast listener will actually share it with someone else. And that sharing is what's actually going to grow your podcast over time. I think we need to get clear about this. Seeing podcast clips on social media does not necessarily mean that those podcasts are so big or getting a huge listenership. Clips on social media is one thing. A podcast with an audience that is deeply engaged to the long form version of their content is another thing. And what you want is this other thing. So yes, you can use clips on social, but that's more for brand awareness. You want to be focused on creating something that engages people so deeply that they will share it over and over again. And those people are going to be like your brand ambassadors. So use them wisely by respecting their time and fulfilling their needs. The second thing I want you to remember is that growth doesn't come by chance. It comes through collaboration. So I don't want you to be focused on getting a viral clip that people see and then that blows up your podcast. The likelihood of that happening, first of all, is something you can't really control, so don't try to control for that. Instead, try and actually collaborate with people who have the same audience that you want to reach. So if I were making a podcast about fitness, let's say, I might reach out to 10, 15 other podcasters who I think are targeting the same audience that I'm targeting. And maybe to start, it's not 10 or 15, maybe you just start with 2 people. But really what you want to do is get on their podcast as a guest and deliver value to their listeners. If their listeners hear you on this podcast and they already trust this podcast host, you, by virtue of being their guest, are going to earn some of that trust. So that's a really powerful way to actually grow your podcast, by collaborating with other podcasters. A trick here is you might feel like you need to be on a podcast that has huge reach in order for it to be effective. But really, it's far more powerful for you to be on a podcast that shares the audience that you're trying to reach, more than being on a huge podcast where most of those listeners are actually not your ideal listeners. So you're going to get a bigger return on investment by focusing your attention in the right place. And if collaborating with people feels like way too much for you right now, then you can start with something as small as tagging the podcast hosts that you share an audience with when you talk about the topic that you both have in common. So I might tag some of the other fitness podcasters if I were making a fitness podcast of my own. So think about it as a collaborative environment where as you grow your audience, you're also going to be able to share your audience with them. But in the meantime, as you're growing your audience, you can tap into their existing audience and grow your show that way. And one word of warning here is when you're first starting out, it can feel a bit intimidating to reach out to other podcasters to see if you can be a guest on their show. And the truth is, people don't just want a guest on their show. They want their listeners to get some sort of value from this guest. So when you're pitching yourself, you need to make sure that you are being useful to this podcast host and their audience. That is really how you earn the trust. And so if you feel intimidated because you don't yet have a big audience, I really want to encourage you to start thinking in terms of the value you're offering as being in the knowledge that you're sharing, not necessarily in the number of people that you're going to bring as a result of being on their show. Does that make sense? I hope so. The third thing to remember is that social media is fine, but really email is gold. And especially a platform like Substack. I know it feels like I work for Substack. I don't, but I really think the platform is brilliant. It serves as a home base for your podcast. And that means that your listeners will not forget about you if you don't happen to pop up on their Spotify or their Apple Podcasts list, okay? So this is especially important if you're gonna make a seasonal podcast that's not on every single week. So a great example of this, and I've talked about him before, is Lenny's newsletter. Lenny runs a podcast and it's all hosted on Substack. So when you go to his Substack, you can find his newsletters, you can find his podcast episodes, and it's really an ecosystem that's built around a concept, an idea, essentially to serve the listener. So always try and get your listeners to engage with you over email instead of engaging with you on social media, because your newsletter is a platform that you actually own. My fourth tip is to use YouTube to your advantage. Here's a reality we have to acknowledge right at this moment while we're talking. This is June 2025. Podcasts are just not that good as search engines, okay? But YouTube is a very good search engine. If you're gonna use the words that your listener is searching for in your show notes for your podcast, for example, you might want to leverage that and use that on YouTube. This might look like you using clips of video from your actual podcast, even if your podcast is audio only, and putting that on YouTube or YouTube Shorts. It might also look like you creating relevant commentary on a subject and then directing people to your podcast through YouTube Shorts. I really encourage you to do this on YouTube and not on a platform like Instagram, even though I'm on Instagram, no hate to Instagram. The reason I encourage you to use YouTube is because it's such a good search engine. So definitely optimize the words that you're using, the titles you're using to be aligned with what your listeners are searching for, but make sure that you are actually on a good search engine in order for your listeners to find you. All right, so if you've watched this and you're wondering, all right, which is the highest priority? I want to tell you right now, the collaboration is the highest priority. And the reason for that is you are getting in front of podcast listeners who trust the host and therefore are going to trust you. And if you can deliver value in your own podcast episode over episode, then they're going to stick with you for the long haul. Now, if you're ready to stop guessing and start growing, you might want to book a free 20-minute discovery call with me to learn more about the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator that I run. And if you're not quite ready for that step, you might want to download the 10-step guide to launching your podcast. And I will see you in the next video.